Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's session offered by the Association of Pittsburgh Priests as part of our Spring 2023 Speakers Series. My name is Gretchen Jeserk, and I am humbled and honored to serve as your MC this evening, Tuesday, May 2nd, 2023. So our topic tonight is an emotionally charged one: women's leadership in the Catholic Church. Oxymoron, token, reality? Our speaker is Dr. Carolyn Woo, author, executive, educator, leader, mother, wife, woman of faith.
Thank you very, very much. It's just such a privilege to be with you, people of faith, people who care so much. This particular organization, which has been going on for 60-some years. Before I go into that question, I'll just give you a little bit of background on my journey as a woman. My grandmother, it's only 3 generations ago, had her feet bound. She was one of those who was brought up in traditional China, where women would be more attractive if they can't move or just move slowly, I guess. But it was a torture. So she was one who had her feet bound. She was one of 4 wives to my grandfather. And this is my maternal grandfather. And my paternal grandfather also had 4 wives. So that was just 2 generations ago. My mother was educated, but never went to school. There was a tutor who came to her home and so taught her how to read, but she never went to school and was very protected. But fortunately, she was born in a time where they no longer bound girls' feet. She married my father. They hardly knew each other. In some ways, it was an arranged marriage during World War II, when the Japanese had occupied Hong Kong. As a Chinese couple, my parents wanted 2 sons, an heir and a spare. Now you hear it from Prince Harry. And by the time they had 4 children, there was only 1 boy. And I was the 5th. And there was sort of an agreement between my parents that if I were not a boy, then my father could take a 2nd wife, which was totally legal at that time. Well, I was not a boy, I'm not a boy, but fortunately my mother conceived soon after that, and indeed number 6 was a boy. So anyway, our family was intact. In the intro, it was mentioned that I was educated by the Maryknoll sisters. They were an unbelievable influence on me. I was there from grade 1 to 12. I would say my faith was very much formed by them. Just a couple of things. I remembered asking them, why would you leave the United States to come to Hong Kong? Just because to me, United States was the golden land. Like, why would anybody ever leave it? And I said, and why would you come over to educate us? Like, these Chinese girls. And one of the sisters said, we love you before we even met you. That was the answer. We love you before we even met you. I had a teacher whom I maintained till a relationship with until she passed about 5-6 years ago. Her name is Teufel, Sister Mary Lou Teufel. And she would tell people, my name rhymes with joyful. And that was how the sisters operated, with great love and with a joy that just sparkled. One of my teachers became the president of Maryknoll, and before then she was the liaison to Congress when they were investigating the murder of the 4 women who were killed in El Salvador. That gives you a sense of my exposure. And I would say in my work, even before I joined Notre Dame, I was fairly active with Catholic organizations, starting with my parish. And, I sat on a diocesan council. even in my early days. And I would say, and then joining Notre Dame for 15 years and then CRS for 5 years, I probably served on the boards of 30 some Catholic organizations and interacted with even a lot more. The work with CRS relies on collaboration with global partners. We probably have 1,200, 1,400 organizations that we partner with across the world, and half of them are Catholic. So I've done a lot of work and just really been in the ecosystems of Catholic organizations across the many different sectors. So the book Rising came from a dangling conversation. It was the pandemic, and I thought it would be a good time to sort of focus on writing since I wasn't moving around to give talks or whatever. And the dangling conversation took place in about 2015. One evening I was at Georgetown, and there were 3 speakers. I was one of 3 on a panel, and the other 2 speakers were Sister Donna Markham, who was the president of Catholic Charities USA, and Sister Carol Kean, who was the president of Catholic Health Association, and I was serving as CEO of Catholic Relief Services. That evening was billed as historical because there were 3 women who were leading these very large ministries of the Catholic Church in the United States. The hall was packed, and there were students from Catholic girls' schools in the area. So afterwards, some of the girls came up from the Catholic high schools, and it was a weekday, so they were there on a weekday. And one young woman said, she said, Dr. Woo, tonight they said it was historical because of these 3 women. Are you folks just exceptions? I mean, is this a real path? In another word, is this just token? Is it just really a rarity? Kind of like don't sell us a bill of goods about opportunity for women in the church. Really, is this real? Or is this truly one of those things that, just by happenstance? And I was about to answer. Then somebody came up and wanted a selfie, and then before I know it, the girls have to go back on the bus to go home. So I never answered that question, which probably was a blessing, because how do you answer that question just off the cuff? But I never had a good answer, and the question stayed with me. So during the pandemic, so now we're talking about 2021, 2020, 5 years later, I thought, I really need to think about this question, which is about the role of women, and particularly are women leaders of the church. And of course, there is so much, I would say, frustration, disappointment, I think anger. There's also anguish about sort of like women just don't matter to the Catholic Church. That is generally the primary narrative. And of course, I meet a lot of young people. I used to be with the universities. I still, live close enough to do the talks and so on. And young women, they just assume that the church does not want them. A friend of mine was talking to her daughter about to enter college, and the mother asked her whether she had any desire to sort of serve in ministries for the Catholic Church after graduation. And she said, why would I want to work for an organization that doesn't want me? Like, why would you even raise this point? Because the church has no interest in women. The door doesn't seem to be open. And, from the different comments from young women, they said, I don't even know where the door is. And I gave up looking, tell me one person who seek to work for the church. And I thought, oh my, this is really sort of a very wholesale response to this perceived rejection of women's contribution as leaders. And of course, we know women cannot be ordained, and it all comes from that. And I have so many good friends, women who have left the church. Yeah. And so I also hear my very good friends when they talk with their daughters, they talk about the injustice to women. They talk about the voice of women not being recognized. Many of them, of course, cultivated a pretty healthy sense of activism in their daughters. You know, there's all sorts of cultural issues that happen in school, Catholic schools, and so on. And my friends would be very proud of their daughters and granddaughters who spoke out for, let's just say, you know, gay rights, which is very good. I mean, that they spoke out. But missing in those conversations were sort of like an explanation of what is church? Why does church matter? We, as the body of Christ, if we just keep splintering away, what does that mean? So it's not that I am not proud of the generations who are now stepping up to give voice to these very important issues. I am just concerned that there's nobody who presents sort of the theology of we as the people of God helping each other on the journey of salvation. I mean, that part just doesn't get covered. And a lot of the anger and the rejection comes from the sense, the perception that women are rejected. They're not wanted. We are not wanted. Yep. You know, this pay, pray, and obey would be funny, except that is really in the mind of people. And it drives all the decisions. So because of that, I thought, you know, of all people, you should look into all these different sectors, whether they are Catholic social service, like Catholic charities, Catholic relief, and all these global Catholic development organizations. There's Catholic healthcare, there's Catholic universities, there's Catholic communications and publishing and so on. Yeah, you know how to get to these associations and take a look. And that was the beginning of the work. So actually, I had more research to do, but I had to stop somewhere. I got data from the Catholic Health Association, which is, you know, comprised of all Catholic health systems. And there, I found that a third of Catholic hospitals are run by women. And I have to say, Catholic health systems are one of the most complicated organizations to run. I mean, it is complicated in many different ways. And of course, they usually are large in terms of dollar figures. They're complicated. But 1/3 of those organizations are held by women presidents. Catholic universities, again, about 1/3, over 1/3 of Catholic university presidents are women. Catholic charities, which of course belong to the different dioceses, close to 50%, 1 out of 2 Catholic charities organization, 1 out of 2 is run by women. And that's a very big number. And Catholic charities are complicated entities too. If you think about the work that they do, the funding issues, the legal issues, the legislative constraints, the issues of church, and so on. But about close to half are run by women. Catholic schools, of course, Catholic schools K through 12, about 2/3 of Catholic schools have women as principals. And about half of the dioceses, the Catholic education, the superintendents are women, half. And so these are actually very amazing numbers. Now, you could say that Catholic health and Catholic universities. Some of those were started by religious order of women. So it was not unusual that a sister would be the president. But when the mantle was passed from religious sisters to the lay people, there were sufficient number of lay women who could step in. One could have easily hired a lay man, but it went to lay women. So there was some degree of formation. I think there's some consciousness about the need to groom and mentor and develop women to take over. Now, Catholic schools tend to be run by priests because they belong to dioceses. Catholic social agencies like Catholic Charities also tended to be run by priests because, again, they were related to the dioceses. Now, those also had a high percentage of women who step in. Just like I said, about 50% of Catholic Charities agencies are run by women, 2/3 of school principals, and about half of Catholic education superintendents are women. So these are just the numbers. And at the diocesan level, there was a study that was done more than 20 years ago, which already said women religious, so a lot of sisters, were holding very important appointments in the diocese. Some of them were chancellors. Some of them serve on the tribunal as tribunal judges. Some of them ran finance, and nowadays the chief operating officer of some key dioceses are women. The chief legal officers are women. Some of them are directors of strategies and operations. And nowadays, the people who are vice president for strategies and so on have to deal with church closing and parish consolidation. Many of them deal with personnel, which include priests. There are priests who answer and report to women. So at the diocesan level, actually, it is not uncommon to have the top 5 or so positions, other than the one held by the bishop, to be held by women. So I have to say that this is not an oxymoron, and is more than just a token. I don't think we're all the way there. There's still some pockets you could point to, and a lot in pastoral ministries, actually, where women leadership is not well represented or recognized. But on the other hand, it certainly is not the picture of like women could never be leaders of Catholic ministries, or that, you know, their contribution and their talents have no place. I did some literature review before writing this book. And I just want to say this whole picture of women actually leading Catholic ministries is not well addressed at all. There's a lot of literature basically identifying the role of women in scriptures, for example. There's a whole exploration and unveiling of sort of women in the early church. There's a lot more of, you know, women theologian and their voices being recovered. But there's a lot of books about women saints, and, you know, their leadership, their entrepreneurship, and so on. But about, you know, if you're looking at modern church reality, there's just not many articles and so on that get at this picture. Now, occasionally there are articles in like America Magazine and the NCR where they will highlight like 8 women leaders and introduce them. So there's a little bit of that, but not sort of like, I would say in my case, really pointing out that I think the picture and the depiction is incomplete and is biased. And I think there is a cost for this bias. And that is women are walking away based on the perception that, no, they're not wanted. Nobody wants to hear them. Their talents are totally dismissed. All on the basis, I think, of women not being ordained, and also just generally the tone of activists in the church. By the way, I appreciate activists in the church. I think many of us, and you in particular, have played that role. But I think that the depiction is incomplete. And as a result, we have a whole generation of women who just assume there are no doors, they don't look for it, and they're leaving the church. Now, I think that when people leave the church, it should be out of deep reflection and the struggle with sort of where the church is, what is the vision of God for church, and how they don't see, the alignment. But I don't want them to just walk away based on the perception. And sometimes just kind of like an excuse, haven't thought about it, wouldn't be spending any time thinking about it. I think that with this cost is a major cost. I think we also owe a debt to the women who have served in these roles. And you won't believe I would say it. We also owe a debt to the authorities, and many times authorities have been in the church, who have actually brought women into these type of positions. Women don't go into diocese and leadership, without the support of the bishops. So that's why this message is so important to me, because I am concerned when this is so incomplete, it doesn't challenge us to really think about our role in the church. Who are we as community, more than just any community, but the body of Christ? How do we contribute to that body? How do we stay with the tension and move through the tension and make it better? What is stewardship for this body of Christ? What is our role? And I think that really needs to be challenged. There are different perceptions, and I would say misperception. I think another misperception, in addition to that, there's nothing for women in the church, is the whole idea that the Vatican, there's no support from the Vatican for women. Well, let's put it this way. We need a lot more support from the Vatican for women. But it is not without some degree of efforts. Pope Benedict XVI, probably not perceived as a purveyor for women in the church. He actually made a very strong point that co-responsibility for the church between ordained and lay people is critical. And it's not collaboration, it's co-responsibility. And he said that ordained ministry and the other ministries are different in kind, but not in importance. That ordained and the other ministries of the church are equally important, right? So he said that. And I think Pope Francis has tried a lot. So Pope Francis became Pope around 2013, but the Vatican actually started bringing more women into the church from 2010 to 2019, those 10 years. The percentage of women appointed to positions increased by 70%. And I just want to say, I know we say that's still a small number, but in the Vatican, people just don't give up their jobs. And mostly, jobs which are held by lay men, mostly, they get passed on for generations. It's just not let going of jobs. But during that time, there was 70% increase in women who were appointed. And I just want to say, the Council for Economic Affairs or something like this, which is the council that manages the finance of the Vatican, which the Pope really tries to open it up to some daylight. That council has 14 or 15 members. 7 of those have to be lay people. So it's a little bit less than half. So 7 have to be lay people, and Pope Francis appointed 6 women for those 7 slots. And he changed these pontifical council and renamed them as dicastery. And it's not just a change in labels. Dicastery can be run by lay people. So he opened up, I think, the governance to lay people. And I think a week ago or so, there was the announcement that for the whole process, what is that process? Synodal process. And now 70 plus lay people will have votes. The lay people used to be like observers, they didn't have a vote. But now about 70 will have a vote. And this is about 25% of attendees. And he asked that young people be included in those 70 people, and also let 50% of those be women. And they will all have votes. And there used to be representatives from 10 male religious orders, and now it would be 5 male and 5 female religious orders represented. So I just want to say, I guess I'm a half full, half empty person. In development work, you could never eradicate completely poverty, but there could be progress, and we have to work towards that progress. And that's how I look at things. The 50% that remains is still a problem. But I would like to say, I think that there has been sincere efforts starting at the level of at the Vatican. And really, these Catholic hospitals, Catholic universities, and diocesan administration, and so on, there have been men really who have supported the appointment of women. I think that there is another misperception when people say, women are not ordained, and so it doesn't count. It doesn't matter what else you do. It doesn't count when women cannot be ordained. I listen to that. I kind of sort of know what it means in one way, but it basically said, if it's not ordained ministries, all the other ministries don't matter. All the other ministries that women are leading is secondary to ordained ministries. I don't think that's what people are advocating for women ordination is really saying. But in a way, when we say all the other appointment to the other ministries does not matter, my Lord, the social ministries where God, when he told Peter, he said, feed my sheep, and I'll tend my sheep, feed my sheep. All these other ministries, social, educational, health, and so on, they're the ministries which Jesus charged us to undertake. And so I think we have to be very careful too, that as we advocate for women in the church, that we don't inadvertently give the message that all the other ministries don't matter, even if, their access to women as leaders. So I'm going to stop here because I just said a lot. I mean, go on and on. I could go into sort of what are the challenges, the action, what are the capacities I see as necessary to be leading the church, various ministries. But I'm going to stop right here just for some conversation.
Thank you. So we see a few things coming up in here. We've got one here commenting that women feel devalued by the church, not based on the jobs that we can hold, but because of the underlying assumptions and misguided theology that undergirds the insistence that we are not able to be ordained. Once we read Genesis and have an understanding of how God created us, and read the New Testament and see how Jesus interacted and respected women as equals, it becomes impossible to condone the lack of ordination of women. It reveals a male hierarchical structure that was imposed by humans, not God. What is, in fact, the explanation for the inability to ordain women that makes any theological sense?
I don't think it makes any theological sense that I could come up with. I recently saw a very wonderful documentary that I recommend to everyone, and it's called The Pope Answers or something. Is Pope Francis interacting with a group of young people. And I would say of all the different issues they brought to him, the reason for not ordaining women, I think was the weakest. So I think the church has not given any rationale that I could understand about not ordaining women. So I completely agree. I think that is an issue that has not been addressed well, and it's an injustice. But my point really is, if we only focus on that and therefore say all the other things that women do to shape the church in the world, if all of those things we could say none of that counts, that's what I take up as an issue, is zero or nothing. If there's no ordination, nothing else counts, is where I think that we have created a message such as none of those other ministries count. Mm-hmm. Or that women's gifts are totally ignored. So I agree. I do not understand why women are not ordained, cannot be ordained. But at the same time, I cannot buy into a wholesale depiction of therefore women's gifts and even women's voice have no hospitality.
Gretchen, your husband Jeff had a question.
Yeah, he did, and he's talking in terms of we are seeing in some cases female role reduction at conservative parishes, in particular diocesan church, yet university churches continue to promote and behave in a more equitable way. How do you see this divide between diocesan church and church in the educational setting? And what does that mean to you? What can we take away from that?
So in terms of the actions later on that need to be taken, I talk about 3 types, which is formation, transformation, and information. I want to take up the transformation part of it. Actually, if you the places where women have the most negative experiences with the church, I'm sorry to say, is generally with parish ministries. And I think the reason for it is that parish ministries' governance is still very much determined by the pastor. A one-person ministry, a one-person use of authority, where that person is very much conditioned by, in this case, his comfort, his priorities, and his own formation. And women actually have articulated more negative experiences in that setting. Now, if you look at universities or health systems, or even Catholic charities now, the governance is very different. It's a board. And the board has certain type of decision-making power. It has certain articulated principles, including the inclusiveness of women, and decision-making, which is not so much swung by one person's biases and priorities. in those cases, we've actually seen women progress. So I would say, to the extent in various institutions where governance is very much determined by just one person or maybe one cohort of persons, there are sort of governance situations where you just recruit your friends and they think the same way and they would support you in what you do. But while that exists, by and large, institutional governance now has more challenge. There are people who could raise challenges to that. And I think that the governance within our church, particularly based on sort of the whole parish hierarchical, canonical based sort of authority of the pastor, needs to be sort of challenged, perhaps even within the community itself about that. Look, we look at Protestant churches, and Protestant congregations certainly have a lot more say in terms of leadership and priorities and so on. So, I think this whole cultural thing where in more quote unquote conservative organizations, and particularly when it is governed by very small bodies of like-minded people, those things tend not to create opportunities for women.
Thank you.
This is a transformation of the governance issue within our church.
Mm-hmm. Sister Barbara, you have your hand up.
Yes, I'm concerned that one of the elements that surfaced in the synodal process was one of the issues is clericalism. And what I find is that many women actually participate in promoting clericalism. If you have a choice of father speaking or sister or a laywoman speaking, they want father. He's more of authority. The other thing I experience in all levels, societal and in the church, is women oftentimes do not support one another. They do not promote each other. They don't advocate for one another. And I'm just wondering, what do we need to do as women? If we want equality, we have to be equal with one another as well. So.
Well, Sister Barbara, that's a very good point. And actually, one of the causes I cited for, this journey for more women to lead is that there are a lot of women who are not for this idea. You're right. When there's a choice between father, sister, Mrs., and whatever, it's always father. I think that's an education. Like I said, our formation is very important. Formation, transformation, and information. Our formation to understand the role of the laity and the role of the ordained ministers, the role of ordained ministry versus social ministries of the church. We need to really rethink, what does co-responsibility means? I think that there are different groups now which is trying to give women's voice more play, like Women Preach is one of those examples where they say women have very good thoughts in terms of their reflections on scriptures. Let's hear from them. But Sister Barbara, what you raised then is really sort of the self-education which is needed by women. There are women who say, the priest is ordained and therefore one step closer to God, so, we're all very close to God. Or there are people who actually say, I don't know if women would make good leaders. Are they tough enough? Are they emotional? Can they deal with really difficult decisions? They also question whether women could even play the leadership role. So I think that is sort of the formation of us as lay people to address their issues.
Yeah. Thank you. There's another very good question here from Vicky talking about, that no, we shouldn't focus exclusively on ordained ministry. However, visibility matters, especially when it comes to younger women seeing models for leadership. And in fact, that starts all the way back with how we envision God, and what can we as a church do about God being always visioned as male, and how that overvalues male humans and undervalues female humans. How can women who are in positions that might not be as visible to the average Catholic mentor younger women? So women are there, but they're not the one up on the altar. They're, sort of the best supporting actress kind of thing. So how do we deal with that?
That question echoed a comment, which is not uncommon, when people said, I've never seen a woman at the front of the church speaking. And that's the problem. I think that, again, when it comes to like parishes, it would be good for women to give the report for the church in terms of its financial performance, women to give a sense of the strategy and direction of the parish, to have school superintendents and the female principal who exists to come in and stand in front of the church to give the report. I think overall in parishes, you have to work hard, women as presidents of parish councils. There are some opportunities, but generally limited. I would also say the Catholic Church has not invested in youth formation. And so neither men, boys, or girls are really particularly schooled in how to provide stewardship and contribution and take care of this community called the body of Christ. Neither boys or girls are really very much engaged in that. And actually, it's a problem of the Catholic Church. I also did some reading and so on and so forth about how other churches invest in their youth so that they become really sort of active and contributing members of the church who see their job as helping carry the church forward. Well, we haven't invested in that type of engagement of young people for neither boys nor girls. If we had those, by the way, there's also ways to engage women in making those messages and cultivating that type of sense of stewardship of women also. So yeah, there's a lot more work to do in terms of parishes. As you heard me talk about the governance, the lack of, it's just sometimes reminds me of a really tired church. When I ask why these things are not done, they say we have no money and no people. And I think it doesn't reflect the Holy Spirit in these things. Now, where you see women mentored and highlighted are really in these big ministries of healthcare and universities and education. I want to sneeze. That's right now what I'm trying to do with. Mm-hmm. So, and those also have greater degree of accountability through the governance process and say, in succession planning, do we have women? And now actually they're moving into the ranks, African-American women and in the whole mentoring journey. So I would say, and women have to actively do that. Yeah, and I think in parishes, it just doesn't reflect the type of energies that create those opportunities and vehicles for engaging and developing men and women for these future opportunities.
Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if you would want to move to the second portion, because we should try and wrap up the speaking and Q&A part by around 20 after. So what do you think, Dr. Woo?
Happy to do that. So I just want to say, I'm not saying that this is a rosy picture. I'm just saying that it's probably a little bit less biased than it is presented in public arenas. Now, women still face challenges in these roles. First of all, particularly in parishes, the idea of co-responsibility, I don't know whether that is a pervasive sort of theme. In the formation of priests in the seminaries, Pope Benedict talked about co-responsibility very seriously, but I have heard of exceptions where that becomes real, but by and large, it's not real enough yet. I think women as leaders, at least in these current times and in the next 10, 15 years, will always be outsiders. A lot of these ministries, they're church-based ministries. They come from a culture of male-led, situations. Many, of the people in position with authority, they have a network. They are in a network with each other. Some of them are tied to religious orders, and people have known each other for a long time. Some of them have worked with the bishops or whatever. And by definition, women are just out of that particular ecosystem. And a lot of women leaders, too, are also recruited from outside the institution. So you're new and you're not part of this ecosystem and you're not part of this network. And so how women gain credibility as an outsider coming in takes time. And it takes even with a supportive board, it takes time. It sometimes needs relationship building, which requires intermediaries to sort of lay that groundwork. So I think women going into these positions are still outsiders. The third thing is that there's a lot of differences in the way that women lead and how the church leads. The church leads by authority and hierarchy. There's an expectation of where people belong and the sort of various boundaries that church hierarchies in some ways depict. Now, the women leaders in my book, and I have a total of 16 plus myself that I had them write essays and so on, reflecting on this. The qualities that the women in my book, and 16 is not a huge number, but it's not a small number either. They focus very much on sort of relational characteristics, building bridges, collaboration, building up their staff, giving credits to the group, bringing peace, for example, is important to them. But the whole sort of relationship building part of it is very important to how women lead. And I just want to say the way that the church is relationship building, but the relationship building is within the network of clergy, and the relationships is very much defined by hierarchy and people moving through that hierarchy. So negotiating those differences is very important. And I think compounding it is not easy right now to deal with all those cultural differences. And, the employment of gay people, for example, in church ministries, the whole transgender issue. Can you imagine running a school where you deal with children who are seeking for a change, homosexual parents, same-sex parents, and so on, speakers. These are the usual fights. So the whole cultural all these issues become sort of like additional hurdles to jump. And, those definitely require relationship and rapport, so that people understand where each is coming from. They understand sort of the respect and the consultative process, who has authority to make what type of decisions, how to disagree and come back again to get work done. And those things really depend on relationships. And as I mentioned earlier on, for women, those relationships tend to not be as mature and built up in the early tenure of their jobs. So those are the challenges. And I just want to say, the way we get into building it better, I mentioned the whole formation, a formation of lay people, formation of clergy, formation of lay people accepting their role as part of the body of Christ, with co-responsibility to build this body, as by our baptism as prophets and king and priest. Priest means that we all have a role in bringing people to God. So it needs formation of lay people, of young people, both boys and girls, of clergy in the process. It requires transformation of the governance and the way that we lead church ministries. And finally, information is a very pragmatic issue. I remember a consulting firm calling me. They were hired to find women board members for the different hospitals in the different cities that this Catholic health system operates in. They need local board. And this executive search firm called me and said, Carolyn, it's very hard to find women for these boards, And I said, where have you looked? They've not really looked in many places. They don't know where to look. And I just told them, I said, Catholic universities, there are quite a number of them. Every year they give honorary doctorates and they write up their alumni and alumnae and, who are the people who have achieved a lot. You have the local Catholic ecosystems, the people who have served on Catholic school boards, and so on. I said, that's your hunting ground. But I think overall, we don't know where the people are who could step into these leadership positions. And we also don't know where the opportunities are within Catholic organizations for women's leadership. Now, I've been around long enough. 40 years ago, there was a company, an organization called Catalyst. And their whole role was to increase the number of women serving on corporate boards. And they had all sorts of different types of vehicles that hold people accountable and also assist people in achieving that goal. So I think there's a lot more that needs to be done there. And before I go, I just want to say, when I interview the women, they all say, Carolyn, I want you to know I'm not into power. I'm not into power. And I actually have a section in the book that talks about power being quite important. I think we associate, like really bad people, greedy, egoistical, selfish, unethical people who go after power. And I had to point out in the book, look, women need power power is the formal currency of an institution. It's like American women, we want the vote. The vote is a way for direct representation, is to allow your voice and your thoughts to be captured formally into the organization. Power can corrupt, but power is also necessary. It's an energy, it's a currency to get things done. So I think power, what the Holy Spirit gives us a lot of times is that power to move beyond ourselves. And in organizations, we are asking for the legitimate currency to be given to women so that women don't have to say, oh, let me remind Father Paul that this is really important and he should definitely raise this issue to the board and should vote in a particular way. I could bend Father Paul's ear to get that done. Well, the answer is no. I wish to represent those thoughts and vote in a particular direction myself, or for other women. So I think also some of that is also resolving the issue of women and sort of their natural allergic reaction to power, because this is what we're seeking. We are seeking the legitimate currency of an organization. And if men could hold it, so could women. And women could also corrupt as well as do good things with it. So I'm just going to end here because you've all been very patient and we have a few more minutes for question and the closing prayer.
Yeah, thank you. So one question was, in your research, did you find other countries outside the US who are creating more opportunities for women in leadership, and how are they doing that?
Yeah, I decided not to go overseas because then my book would never be finished. But actually, there's a book out of Australia actually that cited different women who have played leadership role in different, mostly parish ministries. There's a group out of Germany, which is called, I think, Voices of Women, led by a German woman who convenes a session every year at the Vatican to talk about the accomplishments of women. But I don't know how well they're doing within their respective sort of church, but there's a lot of activities outside of the US.
Mm-hmm. There was a comment also from the group here about a group in Germany, where there are women who have actually completed the training for the diaconate, and among them are some Catholic sisters. So that's interesting. Another question was about, what effect and impact does the theology of the body and teaching on contraception play in the perception of women and their role in the church?
I'm going to bypass that because what I know of the theology of body is peace here, peace there. Mm-hmm. I do recall, this is different than the theology of body, where the Pope one time mentioned that we need a theology of woman. Mm-hmm. And my point was, I seldom disagree with the Pope. I like what he says most of the time, but I thought, no, we don't need a theology of the woman. We have a theology of the human, which is very well established. We need a sociology of women. It's really, and the anthropology of women, because a lot of things that hold women back are actually in society and in their experiences and their access to what it takes to be a leader.
There was a question as well about the upcoming synod, and that lay people are voting, but 35 of the women voting are only making up about 10% of the votes. Do you have a clear picture of what the actual voice of women, and specifically lay women, will be in that mix, or not?
Well, no, it hasn't happened yet. It still has to be played out. I know we say that that's not enough. It's about 25% lay people. Mm-hmm. And in the end, this synodal process is an episcopal process. It's really the Vatican. But the fact that I think that's a substantial margin. Look in the US politics, people, if they win by 10 percentage points, it's a big deal. And so that extra, that 25% of voice for lay and 12.5% of it from women, I am hopeful. I think that it's not a token.
Mhm. Okay. One of the questions that comes to mind for me is, and we have a number of members of women's religious communities on this call tonight, as we always do, frankly. And it seems that is a forum in which just de facto women are going to be leaders because they're groups of only women. And, what are the possibilities of levering off that or using that as a model to form women leaders and give them a bigger stage on which to operate and influence?
Yeah, look, I think the passing of the faith from one generation to another generation is by and large taking place through women. Women as mothers, women as the volunteers who teach most of the CCD, religious sisters who are in the Catholic schools, and that's declining too. I think that religious sisters are actually quite well organized to have a voice. So I think Network is the advocacy lobbying arm of the religious orders of women to fight for, poverty legislation. Very well organized to have that. I think the Catholic Health Association under Sister Carol fought for Obamacare to be passed, not without some ugly dynamics, but she had the clout to get that done. I think that, and I get it wrong, I think the League of Women, Catholic Women, I forgot the real name of it, and also the LWCR or LCW, League of Women Religious.
LCWR.
LCWR. Both of these have done a lot of leadership training, really good leadership courses. And I think that the, whatever you call the League of Catholic Women or whatever, actually have a lot of courses to develop the leadership of women. So I think the religious sisters are sort of, they know how to organize in a way to have impact. They are committed to mentoring and bringing the next generation of women into their work and into the leadership of their work. Yes, I think definitely we need to, I wouldn't be here if not for the Maryknoll sisters. Yes, so, the how to give them more platform. I think there are so many Catholic publications, as you know, Commonweal, America, NCR, even OSV, and so on. I think NCR, the Global Sisters Report, was an excellent vehicle to showcase the work of the sisters. And I think the sisters not only have organized their voice, but they actually have sort of led in various type of programs. Anti-trafficking, for example, was led by the sisters in the US. The whole issue of, working against, the prevalence of guns. I think a religious sister actually, became a shareholder of a gun company and called for releasing reports of the type of death that were caused by the guns. So I think that there are both vehicles to showcase that work, as well as the sisters are so much more organized to allow their work to be impactful. I'll give another example. I think 20 years ago, different Catholic hospitals, seeing that it is really difficult to survive as small hospitals, brought their different systems together. The systems were started by different religious orders, and the fact that they could bring it together for a bigger good, which is to allow the ministry to survive, is another indication of what the sisters are able to do in terms of putting the focus on the ministries and less so on their own ego and their own preservation.
We had an observation kind of in that direction on which perhaps you could comment. Certainly that it's important for women to be on boards and in positions of leadership in universities, etc. But what about the realm of spirituality? And, given that women cannot be ordained, and their ability to give homilies and give that feminine spirituality at Mass is quite limited. How do you work around that? I'll add one quick comment and then turn over to you, and that is to remind everyone, as Kevin reminded us, Kevin Hayes, that the CCOC, Catholics for Change in Our Church here in Pittsburgh, actually does a monthly Mass, and it is permitted for a woman to be invited to make a commentary on the gospel, and that is, in fact, something that is done at those Masses. So that's one example, but interested, Dr. Woo, in what else your thoughts would be around that.
I'm going to say two things. I think actually there are different ways to incorporate women's voice on the gospel and the preaching. If nothing else, we have women preach, and people could actually, if they want to, as a parish, pull one of those homilies. They do it every week and put it in the bulletin. And if nothing else, just put a link to that in the bulletin. It just requires a pastor who is willing to do that, right? But that resource is completely there. The second thing I want to say is that actually, I don't know if I developed my spirituality by just listening to homilies. I had encountered many bad homilies. I had one phase in my life where the homilies were so bad that I would take out my checkbook where at the back there are these empty pages with lines, and I would write down for the priest how the homily absolutely doesn't hold together. I think our spirituality is very much affected by looking at how people live their faith. And so in all the other interactions of where youth are watching what is real, what is authentic, and what is not real, I think they look at people who proclaim themselves as Christians. And how do they really sort of incorporate a sense that they are following God's command to love, and that they are filled with the Spirit in terms of understanding their capacity to bring that love. So, yes, I think there are ways to incorporate. By the way, the church that I go to, the priest sometimes invite a woman to give a sort of like additional comments to his homily, and he does that. He gives them notice in advance.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's assume for a minute, because I know it's the case, that there are a number of women on this call right now who are in fact in leadership roles. And I know that I've heard you speak and talk about 5 characteristics that you think are important and help women. Always wanting to serve, commitment to staff. You probably know what those 5 are. I was wondering if you wanted to share any of those comments with us.
Yeah, I actually have 4, and each one is a chapter, but I just give you the chapter title. The first one is the capacity for others. And I don't want to use stereotype, but there's women in my book, they all, just focus on different dimensions in terms of their capacity for others, building teams, giving them credit, building them up, and so on. But I think one of the capacity for others is to be able to see your impact on other people. Sometimes you think we'll do it this way, it's out of good intention, but we fail to understand how we come across and that impact on people. In addition to all the other ways that we make room for other people, and that we could build bridges, and that we could collaborate and so on. But that's the most sort of reflected characteristics of women leaders in my book. The second one is the capacity for self-reflection. The ability to know sort of like, where are we strong? Where are we weak? Where is our own bias? We all have biases. where we tend to have positive effect, where we tend to have negative effect. Where are we hesitant? Where are we confident and maybe overly confident? But it's a whole set of things which is related to the capacity to assess oneself and reflect on oneself. And most people shy away from that because sometimes we just like to be perfect. We like to come across as sort of like, this is a problem, I will solve it. I will just work harder, longer, more hours, and so on. That's not useful, actually. So it's the capacity for self-reflection. The third part, we almost never read about this in a lot of church and nonprofit organizations, is the capacity for alignment. And here is the type of alignment where you look at the environment and the internal organization and where the misalignment is going to happen and how do you bring it back. It's about the alignment between the intended direction and intended goal and the implementation of that. It is alignment between what you hope to be the culture and what actually is the culture of an institution. And finally, it's the alignment between what we say and what is real. So that's the third capacity, is the capacity for alignment. And the final thing I say, this is particularly important for faith-based ministries, which all those ministries I talked about are faith-based ministry, is the capacity to proclaim God. I've been on a lot of organizations when they search for a CEO and they say, oh, there's no Catholics out there, or, this is a good person and this person actually have better skills, more people oriented, more compassionate, and so on. And the person, is not a Catholic, does not have a faith, or, is a Catholic, doesn't practice. I usually listen to this, and I really believe that you don't need a Catholic in all situations, but you need a person who could proclaim God, which is to say, this ministry is here because it's mandated by God for us to serve brothers and sisters. We do this not by our own power, but we do it by the power of the Holy Spirit. And that in the end, we are the hands and feet of God in the world. It's quite amazing. There are people who are very comfortable and there are people who are not comfortable at all proclaiming God. There are people of good skills and people of good values. But I think something is lost when we cannot point our work. We don't say, we're the hands and feet of the Catholic God. We say we are the hands and feet of God. And our guiding principles are by the teaching of God who tells us to love. CRS has a very strong principle that we serve on the basis of need and not creed. And sometimes when there are fundraisers where people donate money for Christians in the Middle East, and we have to say, we can't just serve Christians in the Middle East. Whoever is in need in those areas, we serve them because this is what God told us to do, right? Just feed my sheep. And so I think that those four capacities, the capacity for others is well written on. The capacity for self-reflection doesn't get enough energy and time from the person. The capacity for alignment is very important. If a leader cannot do that, then there's no leading. And the fourth thing is if you're in a faith-based industry, you have to point to God as the reason for this work and actually the power for that work.
Thank you. So I'd ask if you would want to add any closing remarks to that or finish there. How are you feeling, Dr. Woo?
I'm good. I think that it is really very important that we bring our next generation of women to understand what is the body of Christ and how to be a part of it. I think that there are many good reasons to be angry and disappointed at the church. But we also need to sort of situate that in the context why they are needed, and that they are actually sort of welcome. Their gifts are actually very much welcome. I'm very concerned about women not having a sense of what does it mean to be the body of Christ.
Thank you. Thanks you for your very much for your insights and perspectives, Dr. Woo.